November 25, 1918, Abercorn, Northern Rhodesia. 1,100 Askari soldiers stand at attention as their commander, General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, formally surrenders the last German force still fighting World War I. 4 years of guerrilla warfare across East Africa ends, not with defeat in battle, but with a piece of paper announcing the armistice in Europe. These African soldiers had marched thousands of miles, fought British, Belgian, and Portuguese forces 8 times their size, held German East Africa when every other German colony had fallen. Then the victors sent them home with nothing. If you value documented Viking and Norse-era history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Michel Moyd's Radical Potentials, Conservative Realities, published in First World War Studies Volume 10, Issue 1, March 2019, and from the 1914-1918 Online World War I. Encyclopedia's Askari entries, backed by archival evidence from the Tanzania National Archives and British Colonial Office records. Now back to the information. The surrender ceremony lasts 2 hours. 1,100 Askari present arms one final time. Behind them march 2,294 carriers, 819 women, children trailing in the dust. Lettow-Vorbeck insists on signing surrender documents that record his force as undefeated in the field. The British agree. Honor matters when you have nothing else left. Within days, the Askari are marched to prisoner of war camps, barbed wire, guard towers. Names become numbers. The Spanish influenza sweeps through the camps like fire through dry grass. Dozens die weekly. No accurate count survives, but British medical officers note Askari mortality rates, substantially higher than European prisoners. Corpses pile faster than burial details can work. Release comes in early 1919. British officials hand each surviving Askari a discharge paper. Return to your villages, find work, no pension, no compensation, no recognition of 4 years' service. The paper might as well be blank. German East Africa is now Tanganyika territory under British mandate. Everything changes overnight. The German administration that elevated Askari to positions of authority, gone. The German officers who spoke Swahili and promoted African non-commissioned officers, shipped home to Hamburg and Berlin. The German pay scale that gave Askari twice what British colonial forces earned, erased. Former Schutztruppe Askari return to villages they left years ago. Some find families who thought them dead. Others discover wives remarried, children grown, land redistributed. In Mwanza, Ali Kalikilima tries to join the King's African Rifles. The British reject him. Too old, they say. Wrong training, wrong loyalty. He briefly serves in colonial police, then quits. Years of military discipline don't translate to civilian poverty. The lucky ones find work as guards, clerks, minor officials. Most scratch subsistence from small plots. British colonial policy restricts African advancement in administration, commerce, education. Former Sudanese warrant officers become farm laborers. Ex-corporals who commanded machine gun teams dig roads for shillings per day. Paul von Lettow. Vorbeck lands in Hamburg, March 1919. Victory parade through Brandenburg Gate. Tropical uniforms in spring snow. Crowds cheer the Lion of Africa who never lost a battle. He writes memoirs, lectures, campaigns for colonial veterans. The Askari, who made his reputation fight malaria and hunger in Tanganyika, villages no German ever visits. Weimar Republic passes pension legislation in 1923. Schutztruppe veterans qualify for benefits equal to German colonial service. Reality hits different. Inflation devours currency faster than it prints. By November 1923, $1 American buys 4.2 trillion German marks. Pension payments to Africa become impossible. Some compensation trickles through before hyperinflation hits. Bank transfers reach Dar es Salaam sporadically. Exchange rates fluctuate daily. British officials process claims slowly, suspiciously. Many Askari never receive paperwork proving German service. Documents lost in surrender, camps, post-war chaos. Without proof, no pension. Economic disaster strikes Germany. Wall Street crashes. October 1929. Global depression follows. German pension payments to African veterans cease entirely. Tanganyika suffers double blow, colonial economic restrictions, plus worldwide financial collapse. Former Askari compete with thousands of unemployed Africans for vanishing jobs. Adolf Hitler rises to power January 1933. Nazi ideology embraces German colonial nostalgia selectively. Lettow-Vorbeck becomes propaganda symbol of German military prowess. African Askari become footnotes, useful for demonstrating German colonial superiority over British rule. No pension payments resume. World War II erupts September 1939. Germany invades Poland. 6 years of global warfare begin. Pension bureaucracy disappears into wartime administration. Former Schutztruppe Askari in Tanganyika read newspaper accounts of German victories, defeats, final surrender. Their own war ended 27 years ago. Still waiting for recognition. Post-war reconstruction starts slowly. West Germany established May 1949 as sovereign state. New constitution, new government, new priorities. Colonial veterans rank low on reconstruction agenda. Housing, industry, denazification take precedence. African Askari continue waiting. Tanganyika independence approaches. British mandate ending December 1961. Some ex-Askari live to see freedom from European rule. Most have died waiting. Malaria, age, poverty, neglect. Survivors gather occasionally, share memories of safari, Yabwana Leto. The journeys with Mr. Lettow that defined their youth. March 9th, 1964. Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck dies aged 94 in Hamburg nursing home. Heart failure, natural causes. His funeral draws military honors, diplomats, historians. 2 elderly Africans attend, Alphonse Musa and Saleh Malile, former Askari who traveled from Tanzania to honor their commander. German newspapers photograph them saluting the coffin. Human interest story. The funeral triggers guilt. West German Bundestag votes retroactive pension payments same month. Lettow-Vorbeck dies. 46 years after armistice, conscience awakens. Parliament allocates funds for loyal Askari, who served German colonial forces. Better late than never, politicians say. West German embassy in Dar es Salaam receives orders. Identify surviving Schutztruppe veterans. Tanzanian officials cooperate reluctantly. Colonial period remains sensitive topic. Independence struggles featured ex-Askari on both sides. Some joined nationalist movements. Others served British administration. Old loyalties complicate identification. Embassy research locates approximately 350 former Askari. Ages range from 70 to over 90. Many live in remote villages accessible only by foot or bicycle. Some suffered strokes, dementia, poverty-related illness. Others remain sharp, alert, proud of military service they performed decades ago. Temporary cashier's office opens Mwanza, Lake Victoria. German banker arrives with West German marks. Exchange rate favorable. Tanzanian economy struggling. German currency strong. Pension payments substantial by local standards. Word spreads quickly through former military networks. Verification presents immediate problem. Handful of claimants produce faded certificates. Lettow-Vorbeck signed 1918. Brittle paper, smeared ink, barely legible signatures. Most Askari lost documents during imprisonment, displacement, decades of poverty. How to distinguish genuine veterans from opportunistic claimants? German banker has inspiration. Military training leaves indelible marks. Muscle memory survives longer than paperwork. He retrieves office broom, hands it to first claimant. Achtung, Gewehr bei Fuß. Präsentiert das Gewehr. Attention. Order arms, present arms. The elderly African snaps to attention instantly. Shoulders square, spine straight, broom gripped precisely as Mauser rifle. Movements crisp despite arthritis. Age caked civilian clothing. Decades vanish. 19-year-old Askari appears in 90-year-old body. Perfect form, no hesitation. Second claimant, same commands, same precision. Third, fourth, 10th, every man performs flawlessly. German drill instructors from 1900 would recognize the movements. Muscle memory preserved through 50 years of peace, poverty, forgotten service. Bodies remember what documents prove. Each veteran receives payment equivalent to 46 years back pension. Lump sum substantial enough to purchase land, livestock, build permanent housing. Some Askari invest in small businesses. Others distribute money among extended families who supported them through poverty years. Few live lavishly. Old habits of military discipline persist. Local newspapers cover story briefly. Human interest angle. Elderly Africans receive German pensions for World War I service. Historical curiosity rather than justice story. Tanzania focuses on independence achievements, not colonial legacies. Veterans prefer privacy anyway. Recognition matters more than publicity. Payments continue sporadically through 1960s and 70s. New claimants surface occasionally. Men who learned of program late, isolated locations, administrative delays. Numbers dwindle annually. Age, illness, natural mortality. By 1980, fewer than 50 recipients remain. By 1990, perhaps 20. Few veterans survive into 21st century. Last Schutztruppe Askari dies sometime in 2000s. No precise date recorded, no official ceremony. Local burial in village cemetery. Military service noted only in family memories. 4 years fighting for German Empire, 50 years waiting for recognition, lifetime spent between colonial past and independent future. If you value documented Viking and Norse era history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. The script is researched and factual, using sources from Charles Miller's Battle for the Bundu, the First World War in German East Africa, published by MacDonald and Jane's London 1974, and from primary sources in the German Federal Archives Military Archive in Freiburg, backed by extensive fieldwork documentation in the Tanzanian National Archives. Now back to the information. The Askari story reveals colonialism's cruel mathematics. European powers recruit African soldiers for European wars, pay them well during conflict, abandon them immediately after victory or defeat, promise recognition, provide forgetfulness, use military service as propaganda when convenient, ignore veterans when expensive. British officials estimated total Schutztruppe campaign casualties, African and German combined, at 15,000 killed, 20,000 wounded, 30,000 missing or captured. No separate accounting for Askari losses. Colonial record-keeping prioritized European personnel. African casualties merged into statistical footnotes. Lettow-Vorbeck's guerrilla campaign achieved strategic goals, tied down 300,000 Allied troops in African sideshow, prevented reinforcement of Western Front. Cost British Treasury £72 million, 20 times German East Africa's annual pre-war budget. Military success measured in resources diverted, not territories held. Human costs landed elsewhere. Forced conscription of carriers, porters, laborers. Requisitioned food supplies caused famines. Population displacement disrupted agriculture. Disease spread through military camps into civilian areas. Spanish influenza, 1919, killed more Africans than 4 years of warfare. Lettow-Vorbeck's tactics succeeded militarily while devastating civil society. Post-war mythology obscured these realities. German colonial nostalgia emphasized Askari loyalty, military excellence, fighting prowess. British accounts stressed German brutality while minimizing their own. Neither side dwelt on African suffering or veteran abandonment. European narratives served European purposes. Recent scholarship corrects these omissions. Historians like Michel Moyd, Tanya Burer, Thomas Morlang examine Askari experiences beyond European perspectives. Archive work in Tanzania, Germany, Britain reveals patterns of exploitation, service, sacrifice largely ignored by earlier historians. Truth emerges slowly from colonial propaganda. The 1964 pension mission represents partial justice. West German government acknowledged moral debt to African veterans. Payment arrived 46 years late, but arrived nonetheless. Some recognition better than none. Veterans appreciated gesture even while regretting delay. Contrast with other colonial powers proves illuminating. British never paid pensions to King's African Rifles veterans. French provided minimal benefits to West African troops. Portuguese ignored colonial veterans entirely. Belgian record remains unstudied. Only Germany, decades after losing all African colonies, honored obligations to African soldiers, perhaps guilt-motivated generosity. Germany lost East Africa permanently. 1919. No continuing colonial interests, complicated calculations. Former colony became independent Tanzania, 1961. No strategic considerations influenced pension decisions. Pure historical conscience, uncontaminated by ongoing political relationships. Compare modern veteran treatment. American soldiers returning from Iraq, Afghanistan receive medical care, education benefits, preference in government employment. British veterans access national health service, neat pension systems, charitable organizations. German soldiers enjoy comprehensive social support networks. Colonial Askari received none of these benefits. Times change, standards improve. Modern nations accept responsibility for military personnel, but colonial period established different rules. European lives mattered completely. African lives mattered contingently. Military service earned rewards for some, abandonment for others. Race determined which category you occupied. The Manual of Arms test at Mwanza demonstrates military training's persistence. Skills learned young endure lifelong. Drill movements embed in muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. 90-year-old bodies execute commands precisely despite arthritis, aged or decades of civilian life. Military discipline transcends time. This phenomenon appears worldwide among veterans. American Civil War soldiers performing drill at reunions 50 years after Appomattox. British Somme survivors marching perfectly at 1960s remembrance ceremonies. Soviet-Afghan veterans responding instantly to Russian commands decades after service. Military bearing never fully fades. For Schutztruppe Askari, drill represented identity preservation. German training distinguished them from other colonial subjects. Military precision demonstrated competence, discipline, worth in societies that devalued African capabilities. When everything else, status, income, or recognition, disappeared, drill movements remained. Physical proof of military achievement, the broom substitution adds poignancy. Real rifles confiscated at surrender, 1918. No weapons allowed in British colonial territories. Veterans forced to demonstrate military skill with cleaning implements. Dignity maintained through improvisation. Pride expressed despite humble props. Modern Tanzania honors colonial period selectively. Independent struggles celebrated. Colonial exploitation condemned. African resistance movements commemorated. Collaboration with European powers, including military service, receives less attention. Schutztruppe veterans occupy ambiguous historical space. Neither heroes nor villains. Survivors. Few memorials mark Askari service. No monuments in Dar es Salaam. No veteran cemeteries. No official recognition from Tanzanian government. Colonial period remains politically sensitive. Independence narrative emphasizes liberation from foreign rule, not cooperation with foreign armies. Veterans understood this silence, kept memories private. German remembrance proves equally complicated. Lettow-Vorbeck honored with street names, barracks, monuments. African Askari mentioned marginally. Colonial nostalgia focuses on German achievements, not African contributions. Recent scholarship emphasizes partnership. But popular memory prefers heroic European narratives. The pension payments represent historical footnote rather than major story. 350 men receiving overdue compensation. Small number compared to millions affected by East African campaign. Symbolic rather than systematic justice. Gesture toward reconciliation rather than comprehensive reparations. Yet individual impact remained profound. Lump sum payments provided financial security. Veterans never experienced. Land purchases offered stability after decades of uncertainty. Business investments created income streams. Family support strengthened community bonds. Late recognition validated lifetime of service. Some recipients used money for traditional purposes. Livestock purchases, cattle, goats, chickens, provided ongoing sustenance. Land acquisitions enabled agricultural production. House construction offered permanent shelter. Conservative investments matching conservative social positions. Others chose modern applications. Children's education fees, medical treatment previously unaffordable. Transportation to visit distant relatives. Radio purchases, connecting villages to wider world. Calculated modernization within traditional frameworks. Veterans rarely discussed war experiences publicly. Colonial period remembered painfully by most Africans. Military service for European powers implied collaboration, compromise, problematic loyalties. Better to emphasize independence-era participation, not colonial cooperation. Silence protected reputation. Private conversations revealed different perspectives. Pride in military accomplishment. Respect for German training, leadership, treatment, resentment toward British abandonment, appreciation for delayed pension recognition, complex feelings about complex historical experience, nuanced reality beyond simple propaganda narratives. The 64 pension mission closed finally in the early 1970s. Last verified claimants processed, administrative office closed, German banker returned to Europe, records archived in Bonn government files, another colonial loose end tied up, historical debt partially paid. But larger questions remained unanswered. Why did recognition take 46 years? How many veterans died before acknowledgement arrived? What other colonial soldiers await forgotten justice? How many imperial powers ignore military service debts? The Mwanza mission solved one specific problem while highlighting broader colonial legacy issues. Recent African scholarship emphasizes these forgotten voices. Historians working in African languages, consulting African archives, interviewing African families. Stories emerge from European historical shadows. Military service, veteran experiences, post-colonial adjustments gain attention previously reserved for European perspectives. The Schutztruppe story represents thousands of similar experiences. French-Senegalese troops from World War I and II, British West African Frontier Force veterans, Portuguese colonial soldiers from Angola, Mozambique, Italian Askari from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Belgian Force Publique personnel from Congo, military service followed by civilian abandonment. Each case features local variations, but patterns repeat. European recruitment during wartime, African service under European command, post-conflict neglect by European authorities, veteran impoverishment in independent African states, occasional symbolic recognition decades later. Colonial military service created obligations rarely honored systematically. Modern European-African relationships still wrestle with these legacies. Development aid partly compensates for colonial exploitation. Educational scholarships acknowledge past educational restrictions. Medical assistance addresses colonial-era health neglect, but comprehensive reparations remain politically impossible. Symbolic gestures substitute for systematic justice. The 1964 West German pension mission stands alone in directly addressing colonial military service obligations. No other European power attempted similar programs. Britain, France, Belgium, Portugal maintained silence about African veteran claims. Only Germany, perhaps motivated by complete colonial loss, acknowledged moral debt to African soldiers. This unique recognition deserves historical appreciation. West German politicians could have ignored Askari claims entirely. No domestic pressure demanded action, no international law required payment, no strategic interests favored acknowledgement. Pure conscience motivated compensation, rare occurrence in colonial history. The Manual of Arms test became legendary among Tanzanian veterans. Story spread through military networks across East Africa, former King's African Rifles soldiers, British colonial police, independent struggle fighters all heard accounts, proof that military training transcends political systems. Skills earned through service endure beyond service conditions. Physical demonstration carried special meaning in societies, emphasizing oral tradition. Written documents could be forged, lost, disputed. Body knowledge proved authentic military experience. Moving with trained precision testified to genuine service. Muscle memory validated claims more effectively than paperwork. For German banker, conducting verification, test results must have been moving. These elderly Africans maintained drill precision 50 years after training. German military instruction had shaped their bodies permanently. Investment in colonial military education produced lasting returns, human proof of institutional success. But test also revealed tragic irony. Perfect military movements performed by men abandoned by military system, excellent soldiers discarded like worn equipment, trained precision preserved despite institutional neglect, individual excellence surviving organizational failure. The Mwanza gathering represented unofficial veterans' reunion. Askari, who had not seen each other since 1918, gathered around Lake Victoria, shared memories of German East Africa campaign, recalled commanders, battles, hardships, comradeship. Renewed friendships interrupted by 50 years of separation. Language proved problematic, German commands preserved in memory, but German conversation skills had faded. Swahili served as common communication medium. English appeared in documents and official proceedings. Veterans navigated multiple linguistic layers: colonial past, independent present, pension bureaucracy. Ages ranged dramatically among claimants. Youngest veterans had been teenage recruits during late war period. Oldest served entire 4-year campaign from initial mobilization. 40-year age spans among participants. Different war experiences, different post-war challenges, different levels of pension need. Health conditions varied equally widely. Some veterans remained physically robust despite advanced age. Others suffered poverty-related malnutrition, untreated medical conditions, disability from wartime injuries. Pension payments arrived too late for comprehensive health improvement, but provided dignity in final years. Family situations reflected colonial disruption patterns. Some veterans maintained stable marriages, raised large families, enjoyed extended kinship support. Others had been separated from families during imprisonment, displacement, economic migration. Military service had fractured social bonds along with everything else. Geographic distribution illustrated colonial labor patterns. Veterans originated from diverse ethnic groups across German East Africa. Military service had brought together men who would never have met in traditional societies. Shared military experience created bonds transcending tribal divisions. Education levels revealed colonial policy impacts. Pre-war Askari often came from Islamic communities with Arabic literacy. Wartime recruits frequently lacked formal schooling. British colonial education remained limited for most Africans. Veterans possessed practical skills, but limited academic credentials. The pension payments represented substantial sums by local standards. Average amounts equaled several years of agricultural wages, enough to purchase significant landholdings, livestock herds, or establish small commercial enterprises. Financial security previously unimaginable for most recipients, but inflation affected purchasing power. 1964, money held different value than 1918 promised payments. 4 decades of price increases reduced real compensation substantially, still significant locally, but less than originally intended. Time diminished value along with veteran numbers. Political implications remained delicate. Tanzania, newly independent, establishing national identity separate from colonial past. German pension payments highlighted continuing European involvement in African affairs. Independence leaders preferred complete separation from colonial relationships. Veterans understood discretion was advisable. International law provided no framework for colonial veteran compensation. Geneva Conventions addressed prisoner treatment, but not post-war obligations to colonial soldiers. United Nations focused on decolonization, not colonial debt resolution. Individual European countries determined veteran policies unilaterally. The German precedent influenced no other colonial powers. British officials aware of Mwanza payments but initiated no similar programs. French government maintained existing veteran policies without expansion. Belgian, Portuguese. Italian authorities continued ignoring colonial veteran claims. Isolation of German initiative demonstrated its exceptional character. Contemporary documentation remains scattered. German embassy reports filed in Bonn archives. Tanzanian government records in Dar es Salaam. Individual veteran testimonies collected by researchers decades later. Newspaper accounts in German and Tanzanian publications. Fragmented evidence for a forgotten episode. Charles Miller, British historian studying East African campaign, documented pension mission in his 1974 book, Battle for the Bundu. Personal interviews with German banker and Tanzanian veterans provided first-hand accounts. Academic history preserving popular memory for future research. Recent African historiography emphasizes these forgotten narratives. Scholars like Michel Moyd at Indiana University examine Askari experiences beyond European perspectives. Archive work in multiple countries, oral history collection, family memory preservation. Recovering African voices from colonial silence, the Manual of Arms story has been repeated in multiple sources, becoming almost mythical. Perfect drill performance by every veteran, not one failure among hundreds tested, military training preserved through decades of civilian life. Beautiful story, but perhaps too perfect for complete accuracy. Verification becomes difficult 70 years later. Banker died decades ago. Veterans passed away. No official records of individual test results. Family memories may have embellished details over time. Truth and legend blend in historical narratives. Essential story survives, regardless of specific accuracy. What matters more, perfect factual precision or larger historical truth? German pension mission happened. Veterans received compensation. Recognition arrived late, but arrived nonetheless. Justice delayed, but partially delivered. Individual stories may vary, but fundamental narrative remains valid. The Schutztruppe veteran experience illuminates broader colonial patterns. European powers recruited African soldiers for European conflicts, paid them during wartime necessity, abandoned them during peacetime economy. Occasional symbolic recognition decades later when guilt overcame indifference. Pattern repeated across colonial empires. Modern implications remain relevant. European nations continue wrestling with colonial legacies, reparations debates for slavery, exploitation, cultural destruction. Military service obligations represent specific, concrete, documented debts, easier to address than broader historical grievances. Models exist for other colonial military compensation programs. Contemporary veterans, advocacy could learn from Schutztruppe precedent, specific service records, documented obligations, moral debt arguments, political pressure campaigns. German pension mission succeeded because it addressed concrete injustice with specific remedy. Broader approach might achieve similar results elsewhere. The Mwanza mission represents historical footnote with larger significance. 350 men receiving delayed justice, small number was but important precedent. European acknowledgement of African military service, recognition of colonial obligations, partial payment of historical debt, model for addressing forgotten veterans everywhere. Time eliminated most direct beneficiaries, but principle endures. Military service creates obligations, transcending political changes. Colonial relationships generated debts surviving decolonization. Historical injustices demand recognition regardless of temporal distance. The Schutztruppe veterans finally received their due. Others await similar justice. November 25, 2018 marked the 100th anniversary of Schutztruppe surrender at Abercorn. Few people remembered. No official commemorations, no veteran survivors. Historical footnote rather than major milestone. Forgotten war ending with forgotten veterans receiving forgotten recognition. But in village cemeteries across Tanzania, simple graves mark former Askari burials, no military headstones, no official honors, just family memories of men who served German East Africa, survived imprisonment, endured poverty. Rangers received late recognition, died quietly. Their story deserves remembering, so the broom became sword, became memory, became justice. Manual of Arms preserved through 50 years of civilian life, military precision proving authentic service. Bodies remembering what documents forgot. Recognition arriving at last for the Askari who marched with Lettow-Vorbeck across the battlefields of East Africa. In 1965, the final payments were made to the last verified Schutztruppe veterans. The temporary office in Mwanza closed its doors for the final time. Account books were sealed and shipped to German archives. Another page in colonial history turned. But in the hills around Lake Victoria, elderly men walked a little straighter, knowing that someone, somewhere, finally remembered their service.